Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're peeling back the layers on a topic that touches nearly every working American, Social Security, and specifically that often debated payroll tax cap. We've pulled together, a stack of articles, some research, our own notes, really trying to extract the key insights and maybe some surprising facts, too. Our mission is simple: help you get well-informed on this really vital area.
And it's definitely relevant. I mean, discussions about the long-term health of Social Security, they're constant. They're crucial, not just in Washington, but, around kitchen tables. And what we'll see today is that this payroll tax cap, it isn't just some technical detail. It's actually central to that whole financial puzzle. So by the end of this, you should have a pretty clear picture of what the cap is, what it means for the program, and the big policy ideas around it.
Okay, let's unpack this then. When we say payroll tax cap, yeah, it might sound a bit like jargon. But the idea itself is actually pretty straightforward, isn't it?
It is. Essentially, the Social Security payroll tax, it only applies to your wages up to a certain amount each year. A taxable maximum, that's the cap we're talking about.
Okay.
And for 2025, that number, the taxable maximum, it's set at $176,100.
Okay, $176,100.
Yep. So the 6.2% OASDI, that's old age, survivors, and disability insurance payroll tax, it only hits earnings up to that amount. If you earn more than that in a year, say $200,000, while the income above $176,100 isn't subject to that specific Social Security tax.
Okay, and just to clarify it, the 6.2%, it's actually split, right?
That's right. Employees pay 6.2%, and their employers match that, paying another 6.2% on earnings up to the cap.
But what about self-employed folks?
Well, if you're self-employed, you're basically covering both sides, so you're on the hook for the full 12.4%.
Oof, that's a chunk.
It is, but again, only up to that $176,100 limit for 2025.
Got it.
And what's fascinating here, the reason this cap exists and why we're even talking about changing it, it's directly tied to the bigger picture, the financial outlook for Social Security itself.
How so?
Well, reports consistently show that combined OASDI trust funds, they face this long-term actuarial imbalance, which is, a technical way of saying the money projected to come in doesn't quite match the money projected to go out over the long haul.
Okay, an imbalance.
Exactly. And the recent trustees' summaries, these are really key documents for understanding the program's health. They project that the combined reserves could actually run out, be depleted sometime in the mid-2030s.
Mid-2030s. Wow. Does that mean Social Security just stops?
No, that's a common misconception. It's really important to stress that. It doesn't mean the program disappears, but what it does mean is that without any changes, the program would only have enough incoming revenue to pay out a portion of the promised benefits from that point on, maybe somewhere around 80% based on current projections. And that projected shortfall is the fundamental reason, the main driver behind all these proposals you hear about changing the cap. It's about trying to ensure the program can pay full benefits long term.
Okay, that mid-2030s date, it certainly puts a timeline on things, doesn't it?
It does.
And once you understand that financial pressure, you naturally start looking for ways to fix it. Adjusting this cap seems like one of the biggest tools in the toolbox people talk about. So what are the main options on the table?
Yeah, it's definitely a major focus. Generally, you see about 4 key scenarios pop up in policy discussions and proposals. First, obviously, is just leave the cap as is.
Status quo.
Right, the current baseline. Keep doing what we're doing. The second idea is to raise the cap to a specific higher dollar amount, like, say, $250,000. This would definitely pull in more wages under the tax, generate significant new revenue, but it's still, a partial measure. Some high earners would still have income above that new cap.
Okay, so a higher fixed number. What else?
The third option gets a bit more dynamic. It's to raise the cap so that it covers 90% of total national wages. This isn't a fixed number year to year. It adjusts. It's a benchmark that groups like the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, often use when they model solvency proposals.
So it adjusts automatically to capture most earnings.
Exactly. Ensures a large, consistent proportion of earnings are taxed. And then the fourth scenario, the most drastic one, perhaps. Eliminate the cap entirely.
Just get rid of it.
Yep. Tax all earnings no matter how high, from the first dollar to the last. This would obviously bring in the most revenue by far, but as you can probably guess,
it faces the biggest political hurdles.
Precisely. Faces the most resistance.
Makes sense. These aren't just small tweaks, then. They could have really massive revenue implications. You mentioned bringing in more revenue.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of numbers are we actually talking about here? Are they significant?
Oh, absolutely significant. We're talking big numbers. Now, the exact dollar figures always depend on, the specific assumptions baked into the estimates.
Like which cap level and over what time period?
Exactly. Are we looking 5 years out,
Yeah.
10 years, 75 years? And crucially, are those new taxes also going to translate into higher future benefits for those paying them? That affects the math too. But even with those caveats, the research gives us some really eye-popping estimates. For instance, just increasing the taxable maximum to cover that 90% of wages benchmark we mentioned. The CBO figures suggest that could raise hundreds of billions of dollars over a standard 10-year budget window. That alone addresses a pretty substantial chunk of the projected solvency gap.
Hundreds of billions. That's already huge.
It is. But then you look at eliminating the payroll tax cap entirely. Now, we're not talking billions anymore. We're talking trillions over 10 years. Some policy groups, looking at various analyses cited in our materials, have put estimates in the ballpark of, say, $3.2 trillion over a decade.
Wow. 3 trillion.
Yeah. Think about that. A single policy change potentially bringing in enough revenue to close a very large share, maybe even most, of Social Security's long-range shortfall, depending on the specifics. It's a truly staggering figure.
Those numbers are just massive. It really reframes the scale of the options.
Yeah.
When you talk about hundreds of billions or even trillions, my mind immediately goes to the bigger federal budget picture. How does this actually affect the overall federal deficit and the national debt?
That's a really important connection to make. If we zoom out to that bigger picture, the key thing to remember is that Social Security payroll taxes are dedicated funding.
Right, they go into the trust funds.
Exactly. They don't just go into the general pot of money Congress spends each year. They're specifically for the Social Security trust funds. So increasing the taxable wage base, which is what raising or eliminating the cap does, directly boosts the revenue flowing into those trust funds. And that inherently improves their solvency.
Okay, so it helps Social Security directly, but the overall deficit.
Well, think about it this way. If Social Security is more financially sound on its own, it reduces the pressure or likelihood that, down the road, general revenues money from income taxes, corporate taxes, etc., would be needed to prop up benefits. If the trust funds were facing imminent shortfalls and benefits had to be cut, there might be immense political pressure to use general funds to fill the gap. That would widen the unified federal deficit. So, strengthening Social Security with its own dedicated taxes generally helps prevent future increases in the overall deficit stemming from the program.
I see. So it's sort of preventative for the deficit. What about the debt itself?
The debt effect. That depends on a really critical policy choice Congress would have to make. Does all that new revenue get credited solely to Social Security, just shoring up the program? Or does Congress decide, hey, we have extra money coming in, let's use some for other things? If it's dedicated only to Social Security, it stabilizes the program and indirectly helps the long-term debt picture by avoiding those future general fund transfers we talked about. But if some of that new revenue gets diverted to, say, other government spending or different tax cuts, then the direct impact on the overall federal debt becomes much more complicated. It's not a one-to-one reduction.
So the details of how the money is handled really matter.
Absolutely. Let me give you a clear example just to frame it. Imagine you eliminate the cap entirely. High earners start paying that 6.2% Social Security tax on all their wages, maybe hundreds of thousands or millions more than before. That pumps billions, eventually trillions, more directly into the Social Security trust funds. That massive influx of cash could be used to postpone or maybe even completely eliminate the benefit cuts that would otherwise be necessary around that mid-2030s mark when the reserves are projected to deplete. It's a direct financial injection into the system.
Okay, so we've got the mechanics, the numbers, the potential impact. Quite a lot there. But as you mentioned earlier, these aren't just technical adjustments, they're politically charged, and they come with real trade-offs. Let's talk about those. What are the main arguments for raising or eliminating the cap, the pros?
Right, the pros. From the viewpoint of advocates, the arguments are pretty compelling and usually focus on two main things. First, and maybe most obviously, it raises a lot of dedicated revenue specifically for Social Security. That's the primary goal, right? It directly improves the program's long-term financial health, helps secure benefits for current and future retirees, and tackles that projected shortfall head-on.
Solvency. Got it. What's the second main point?
The second big argument is about fairness, or what economists call tax regressivity. It aims to make the payroll tax system less regressive.
Less regressive. What does that mean in this context?
Well, think about the current system. Someone earning, say, $176,100 pays 6.2% on all their earnings into Social Security. But someone earning, say, $1 million a year, they pay that same 6.2% only on the first $176,100. Above that amount, their effective Social Security tax rate drops closer and closer to zero the more they earn. So the millionaire effectively pays a much smaller percentage of their total income in Social Security taxes than the person earning just at the cap. Ah, I see. So the burden is proportionally heavier on lower and middle earners.
Exactly. Once you hit that cap, any additional income is totally exempt from the Social Security tax. That's a key feature that makes the current tax regressive. So raising or eliminating the cap means high earners would contribute more, not just in dollars, but as a percentage of their overall income. Many see this as creating a fairer, more equitable tax structure.
Okay, those are strong points. Solvency and fairness. But like you said, trade-offs. It can't be all positive. What are the main arguments against these changes? The cons or critiques?
Definitely. And these critiques carry a lot of weight for opponents. A major argument against raising or scrapping the cap is, quite simply, that it represents a significant tax increase. And it's targeted specifically at higher earners and potentially the upper middle class, depending on where a new cap is set. If you eliminate the cap entirely, someone earning, say, $500,000 would suddenly pay an additional 6.2% on over $320,000 of income they weren't paying it on before. That's a substantial new tax burden.
Yeah, that's not insignificant. Not at all. And connected to that, some analyses, often from more conservative or market-focused perspectives, raise concerns about potential negative economic effects. The argument is that such a large tax hike could potentially discourage work, maybe reduce savings, or perhaps dampen investment among those affected. There's also the idea that employers facing a higher tax bill for their high-earning employees might try to pass that cost on, perhaps through slower wage growth for those workers, though the actual economic impacts are, frankly, heavily debated among economists.
So, potential economic downsides. What else?
Well, beyond the economics, there's the sheer political reality. Big policy changes that shift tax burdens significantly, especially onto higher income groups, they tend to face very strong political opposition. Getting broad bipartisan agreement on something like eliminating the cap is historically very, very difficult. It's a major hurdle.
Political feasibility. Always a factor.
That always. And one last point, which we touched on briefly, is the importance of the design details. For example, if you make high earners pay more in taxes, do they also get proportionally higher Social Security benefits in retirement based on those extra contributions? Or does the extra money just go into the general trust fund pot without boosting their future benefits? How that question is answered really affects perceptions of fairness and whether it feels like a tax versus a contribution. It also changes the long-term financial projections slightly, so the fine print really matters.
Right. So it's not just whether to change the cap, but how exactly.
Precisely.
We have definitely covered a lot of ground today. It's a complex issue, for sure. We started by really defining what this Social Security payroll tax cap actually is, that yearly limit on earnings subject to the 6.2% OASDI tax. $176,100 for 2025. Then we walk through the main policy options people discuss. Leaving it alone, raising it maybe to $250K, tying it to 90% of wages, or even getting rid of it completely.
Yeah, and we saw the huge revenue numbers involved. Hundreds of billions, potentially trillions over a decade, depending on the path chosen.
Yeah.
And how that money directly impacts Social Security solvency, addressing that mid-2030s projection, and how it connects, maybe a bit indirectly, to the wider federal deficit.
And finally, we tried to balance the picture, looking at the main arguments for making changes, boosting solvency, making the tax less regressive, and the arguments against a significant tax increase, potential economic impacts, and the political challenges.
Which really brings us to a final thought, maybe a question for you, the listener, to mull over. Because this issue isn't going away. It sits right at the intersection of some really fundamental questions. How do we ensure a vital program like Social Security remains strong for decades to come? What constitutes a fair tax system? How do we balance ensuring solvency with potential economic effects and political realities? There's this complex interplay. Given everything we've dug into today, the numbers, the arguments, the trade-offs, what stands out most to you as you think about these different perspectives? What feels like the most critical piece of this puzzle?